And Dave, I think I'll make you co-host for now because it seems to affect the live stream. And then when we get closer to the small groups, I'll make you host.
Okay, sounds good.
So welcome everyone. We'll get started in maybe just a moment. Once again, welcome everyone. Nice to be with everybody tonight. So you can see I'm back in the Common Ground office, and we have some people here in the building, and we're back masked up here in Minneapolis following the CDC recommendation now that our county has what they consider a substantial transmission. So we're following the guidelines to be masked in the building. So I can teach. I'm here in the office. And this is the last of our summer classes on mindfulness of the mind. And so let's begin our time together by chanting slowly the three refuges, and then we'll sit. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, sanghang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Settling into the meditation posture. And we take the time to creatively find a wholesome intention being here in this practice. And you can articulate it with words, or you can have a more intuitive sense of some beautiful intention. I'm here because I care about my life, and I care about our suffering, our seemingly endless capacity to be tight, to be afraid, to be mean toward one another, and greedy, and it breaks my heart. And I want to learn how to be a human being in a way that contributes and is a cause for real healing and freedom. So we have to learn not to be shy about aiming the mind in a beautiful direction. So take a moment in silence now just to articulate in a way that feels real for you, to articulate a wholesome, beautiful intention. And when you're done, realizing there is a mind, there is a knowing mind here. And because of the way our habits are, if we don't give the knowing mind something to know, then the knowing mind is simply going to act out its habits. It will bring attention to its worries, its hopes, its fantasies. So we give the knowing mind a simple task, feeling the physicality of breathing in, feeling the experience of breathing out. This very simple and wholesome knowing of the breath coming in and the knowing of the exhalation. And we're letting the mind unify or gather in this experience of knowing the breathing in and knowing the breathing out. And we really trust the body to relax and breathe in a way that feels natural and uncontrived, not forcing it to be any particular way, but instead just trusting the breathing body to breathe. And simply tracking that natural process with awareness, aware of the breath coming in and aware of the breath going out. And to whatever extent that there's some continuity of present moment awareness, notice this is a kind of healing as the mind, the knowing mind, becomes more unified and simple, knowing the breathing in, knowing the breathing out, and simply letting everything else fall into the background. And tonight, particularly interested in noticing the inner pleasure of this simplicity or this seclusion of the mind being secluded from what it would ordinarily be paying attention to. And this attentiveness to breathing in and breathing out is just a simple support. In a sense, the real object of awareness is the present moment. Of course, the breathing in is happening in the present moment. The breathing out is happening in the present moment. So even though we're attending to the breathing in and the breathing out, recognizing this is the present moment as we breathe in. This is the present moment. This is how it is as we breathe out. So we're cultivating a really helpful persistence, asking the mind to track the present moment by cultivating intimacy with the breathing in and the breathing out. It's a real convenient way for the heart to let go of everything else. And it's such a relief that the mind can leave everything else behind. And just knowing this one thing, breathing in here in the present moment, breathing out here in the present moment. And most importantly, noticing that subtle pleasure simply because the mind is secluded, distant from what usually divides the mind or stimulates and agitates the mind. We're making a very particular effort to appreciate and enjoy the healing of the simple mind that knows the breathing in, knows the breathing out. And when it feels appropriate, just allow the heart, allow the mind to be more and more inclusive of the totality of the present moment as you breathe in and as you breathe out. So nothing is being left out as you breathe in. Everything's included as you breathe out. And this inclusive quality of awareness, you might notice that it has the quality of love or kindness, metta, as if the good heart is saying yes as we breathe in, and again, yes as we breathe out. And the heart relies on the joy and the ease of being present. And it's this joy and ease that allows the heart to be more and more aware and inclusive, not discriminating, saying yes to everything. So as you're breathing in, it's really helpful to sense the lightness of the heart and the deeper ease of the heart, same as we breathe out. And this just allows for very natural dispassion and spaciousness, and you could call it an immunity, not being pushed around by experience. So we're beginning at least to recognize and hopefully appreciate that this heart, this mind is capable of being really beautiful, healed and whole and clear and balanced and inclusive, welcoming. And we want to recognize and appreciate the wholesomeness as best we can with each inhalation and each exhalation. So part of what we're learning to do with this sit is to keep in mind as we're breathing in and breathing out, to keep in mind the beautiful, wholesome qualities that are developing and not feel obliged, as we often do, to pay attention to what's off in the mind, like a disturbance or an uneasy feeling. And especially if you're sensing some dispassion, some spaciousness, this quality of non-attachment, and see if you can just keep that subtle and beautiful quality in mind as you breathe in and as you breathe out. The sense that everything belongs, that the heart doesn't need to be in conflict with anything in the moment. And perhaps we can acknowledge, not in an egoic way, but just acknowledge that this is a mind that is relatively free of aversion, relatively free of greediness, relatively free of distractedness. This is a mind that's not really dull, nor is it restless. This is the mind, this is a heart that has the beginnings of a beautiful, stable balance. This is a mind that can see more and more clearly the way things are. Precisely because this mind is willing to allow things to arise and pass. In a way, everything has permission to come and go, to reveal themselves. Thoughts have permission to come and go. Emotions have permission to come and go. Physical sensations and sounds and sights, smells and tastes. Everything has permission to come and go. And we just appreciate the vast, open space of the knowing mind. There's no place here that there isn't this knowing. Knowing is everywhere. Naturally, effortlessly, the mind knows. And deeply appreciating this simple knowing. Still and silent and like vast empty space, this knowing mind. And you can more specifically attend to the silence or the stillness or the peacefulness. The mind that's not dependent on anything really, not even dependent on meaning or some definition, some explanation, not in need of any of that. So we're developing the capacity to keep something that's very subtle in mind. So the nature of the knowing mind is subtle, but we can learn to keep it in mind and to appreciate and to allow it to reveal its nature. The space of the knowing mind doesn't belong to anybody, doesn't refer back to anybody. It's just nature. And when the thinking mind wants to argue, that's just the activity of the mind being known here and now in the space of the present moment. It arises, the argument, and then it ceases. The space of the present moment is here again. Simple, peaceful, and in a way untouched by what comes and goes. Take your time and adjust your body, stretch a little if you'd like. So again, it's really nice to be with everybody tonight. I'm hoping that you can hear me okay. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this will be our last class this summer. And then we begin again on Monday, September 13th for the fall course. I believe it will be 8 weeks. And we'll be doing the fourth Satipatthana, mindfulness of dhammas. Dhammas is usually untranslated, but it's really, now that we've trained the mind how to be aware of the body, be aware of feeling, tone, be aware of the mind, seeing, knowing the mind, right at the mind, then we basically are studying the activity of the mind, the activity of the hindrances, the activity of the awakening factors, and in particular, the natural process of the mind coming into balance with the awakening factors, coming into this very powerful, wise balance that can see things as they are. The mind that is inclined toward awakening and that awakening process itself. And that, just like in the last 3 Satipatthanas, keeping the body in mind, learning how to keep the body in mind, learning how to keep feeling, tone in mind. This summer class, learning how to keep the mind in mind. And then even more subtly, learning how to keep the awakening process in mind. The most relevant thing to keep in mind, but very subtle. And the kind of effort that's required is very refined. It's not a mountain that sometimes we think about the awakening process as this lowly guy here in the valley, have to climb this high mountain, trudge up it, and it's a lot of work. And I know spiritual practice can seem like a lot of work at times. But the awakening process is a natural process. It has its own natural feedback mechanisms. And so it's really the effort is really about aligning with these natural processes that lead to awakening, right? Because anytime we are interpreting the awakening process as something the self has to do, a red flag should go off, that doesn't sound like the Buddhist teachings. That there is some guy who's got to be this, fearless spiritual practitioner and march through hell on their way to Nibbana. So before I share a little bit, and we'll have small groups tonight, I just want to respond to some questions that were sent in. And this person sent in 2 questions. I'll read them. First question is, why is anger, which seems more like an emotion than an activity of the mind, to me, in my experience, highlighted in this instruction? So you remember the first part of mindfulness of the mind is, one knows lust, a mind with lust to be a mind with lust. One knows a mind without lust to be a mind that is without lust. A mind with aversion to be a mind with aversion. A mind without aversion to be a mind without aversion. Why not another emotion? I think you may have used aversion as a synonym once in observing whether anger is present, although I could be mistaken. Noticing aversion makes sense to me because it seems like activity of the mind. But anger seems like a whole body emotional state. And so this is confusing to me. Could you offer your thoughts on this? Yeah, I think when we talk about greed, hatred, and delusion as these unwholesome roots, they're they're really intentions or motivations, the way the mind frames its experience. So they're a kind of an active part of intending to do. And intention has impact, both in a wholesome way. It's in a way we say it's what lays down or sets in motion karmic fruits. When the intention leaves an impression that leads, colors future experience. So that's what anger is, or aversion, or hate. We have these different words that's basically pointing to that intention to push away, to hide away. Even fear is an expression of aversion. So it's okay if with English, we might have some kind of connotation for the word anger or hatred or irritation or aversion or rage. But basically, we're trying to very quickly in our lived experience recognize when there's that intention to push away. Just like greed is that intention to hold on, to gather, to make mine, right? So they're both a reaction to the present moment. Present moment is not okay because I need to push this away, or the present moment is not okay because I need this. So whether it's greed or aversion, there's the mind, the heart has a problem with the present moment. It's not what it wants. And that's the important thing to recognize. And you're right that anger will be, any of these strong intentions, especially the unskillful, will have a very obvious, or almost always have an obvious bodily expression, because most often the body is mirroring what's going on in the mind. The body is the innocent victim of what the mind does. And it's like the mind, when it's identified with these unwholesome intentions, attached, acting upon these unwholesome intentions like aversion, then the body receives that tension. The second question the person asks, I don't think I understand what is meant by delusion. When I think I understand it as anything that captures the attention of the mind and instead brings it into the past or present, I think it might make sense, but I'm just not certain that this is the intended definition. What is your understanding of the meaning of delusion? Yeah, not knowing, or not seeing clearly, not being connected. Even thinking that I know is an expression of delusion, because however my mind might conceive it, like thinking I know on that conceptual level, is a disconnection, because the mind, the heart, isn't naturally interested in connecting and being intimate in that direct or intuitive way, because I think I know what's happening, or I think I know what this experience is. So that identification with the idea, I think I know, is a block from moment by moment connecting and knowing in that immediate sense. Yeah, so it's a disconnection, and often is expressed by the mind having a fixed view or a fixed idea. That's often, and it might be a really good idea, but the idea isn't the reality. Ideas can bring the mind, like create a bridge in a sense, encourage the mind to connect. The Dharma as a set of teachings from the Buddha their ideas, their thoughts, but presumably if they're used correctly, they bring the heart, the mind into the immediacy of the present moment. If you learn Buddhism or the teachings of the Buddha and you just stay on the level of philosophy, well, then those teachings have failed, and especially in early Buddhism, there's, we hear it so often that it can feel a little off, this word practice. But we use that word practice as a way of remembering that that's the point, not the ideas of the practice, but to take the ideas and to use them in terms of opening to the present moment and seeing, learning, having insight about the way that it is. So a good sit means we've seen something we haven't seen before. Not that we thought something we haven't thought before, but we directly experienced something that the mind hadn't experienced before. And that mind going forward is then different because it experienced something it hadn't experienced before. And, one of the interesting things I think I mentioned earlier in the course is the mind doesn't learn something, doesn't have insight unless it has some stability, some balance, where it's willing to let experience, in a sense, reveal itself. So that hands off. And, we talk about spaciousness and equanimity or balance, but it really points to this, in some ways at least, this aspect of wise effort. We can't have an aggressive effort. It has to be more like resting in the space, in the open space of the present moment, and noticing what's coming and going. And not trying to control, because if we're trying to control or trying to have my experience fit what I read in a Buddhist book, then I'm not actually going to see things as they are. So then in that sense, our experience is our true teacher, and we really have to give it, this chance to teach us. Here's a couple of quotes from one of my teachers, Sayadaw U Tejaniya. If you are not aware, you cannot know that you are thinking. The fact that you recognize that you are thinking means you are aware. And then another little teaching, he says, when you feel disturbed by the thinking mind, remind yourself that you are not practicing to prevent thinking, but rather to recognize and acknowledge thinking whenever it arises. So even like at the beginning of the sit, where we use the breathing process as a more exclusive object, it isn't so much to suppress thinking or to get rid of thinking, but it creates, like, when I have that stability of awareness with the recognizing breathing in and recognizing breathing out, then when there's some other mental activity, fantasizing or thinking about something earlier in the day, because there's a lot of non-reactivity, like the mind is connecting with the breathing in and the breathing out in a really honest, balanced way, then when a thought, an emotion, some negativity, some aversiveness, when something arises, then that balance is going to see that as just something coming and going, as just another phenomena of the body or mind. So we use a lot of our meditation objects are used to help the heart, to help the mind remember that I can be with the present moment in this balanced, non-reactive, non-controlling, non-judgmental way. And we rediscover it by going back to our meditation object, like mindfulness of breathing. But it isn't that other phenomena aren't going to come and go. It's just that being with the breath, because I've trained with the breath, the mind remembers, oh yeah, I can be interested in this really pure way. I can better connect because I've been practicing connecting with the phenomena of breathing in and the phenomena of breathing out. And the heart, in a way, builds confidence that it knows how to unify, to gather in the present moment. So even if another strong experience comes, I remember one of my first residential retreats many, many years ago. And it was like right in the middle of a 9-day retreat. And somebody, 15 feet away just had one of those big sneezes in the middle of a hour-long set. And I remember it's like, and I think at that time we were doing a body scan meditation, each set, we'd just do this body scan meditation. And so, I was in the middle of that. And then the sound, and of course, the attention just went to the sound. It wasn't Mark saying, oh, I should listen to that sound of the sneeze, right? It was clearly the predominant experience. And because it was unexpected, it got the mind, or the attention of the mind. But I noticed that, and it was very impactful because, the meditation hall was quiet, and then all of a sudden there was a loud noise. And so in a way, the hearing of the sneeze was very impactful, but at the same time, there was no reverberations in the mind. It was like being hit by a tsunami, which came and then left, but the mind, the continuity of present moment awareness wasn't disturbed, even though the sound, relative to the subtlety of being with sensation with the body scan, the sound was a very gross, obvious experience. So it had kind of buffeted the sensitivity of the heart, and then it was gone. And because the heart, the mind was in had some momentum of just being in the present moment, it didn't bother to construct any opinion about the sneeze. Oh, that person shouldn't have sneezed. Or, whoa, was that a loud sneeze, right? It didn't need, it was just some big thing happened, was known, and then it ceased. And then the mind went back to being with the body scan. And this is a sign, like how, because the mind, what was really going on in the mind wasn't even so much the body scan, but you see that as the mind develops some samadhi, the experience of samadhi itself is part of what's being known by the knowing mind, the balance and the stability of the balance and the appropriateness of the effort to persist in connecting with what's being known in the moment and the relevance of that. Like all of that, that collectedness, that stability, those wholesome qualities of that knowing mind, that is as relevant, like how the mind is knowing with this, in this really balanced way, in this really stable way, that is more relevant than, the different sensations that are being known as the mind continues with the body scan, or whatever, breathing in, breathing out, or whatever the method of meditation might be. This is from Venerable Analayo's book that some of you have been using as a primary text for all the courses, from the first one in the winter on the body and the spring course on feeling tone, now the mindfulness of the mind in the summer, and also we'll use this for the fall course. And that's his book, Satipatthana Meditation, a Practice Guide, by this German monk, Analayo. And this is the chapter on mindfulness of the mind, and he's writing about the absence of the defilements, the kind of corruptions or torments of the mind. And I mentioned this in the guide. It said, like, to really notice what's not there. It's really relevant to notice what's missing, like how often do we notice when there's no aversion, that there's no aversion in the mind? And this is what he writes. It is of considerable importance that the need evident in the list of mental states, as well as in the refrain, to direct attention to the passing away of a defiled mental state is not overlooked. The task of mindfulness is not only to draw attention to the presence of a defilement, it similarly involves giving attention to the absence of a defilement, like greed and anger, or greed and aversion. We can savor the condition of the mind at such times. We get a feel for its texture and familiarize ourselves with it. We can experience for ourselves how much more pleasant such a condition is when compared to the defiled state of mind. Familiarizing ourselves with the difference between the presence and the absence of a defilement in terms of the texture and flavor of the mind will make it intuitively clear why the latter is preferable to the former. And, just in simple terms, we don't realize how oppressive having an irritated, aversive mind is until we clearly recognize the mind free of aversion. Then it really becomes unbearable when we slide back because of habit into an aversive mind or a greedy mind. We don't realize how tight that is. One of the great things about being on a longer retreat where the mind gets really refined is when the mind gets caught up in some drama, regurgitates some painful event from the past and gets in some sort of revenge fantasy or whatever it might be. And then at some point, mindfulness kicks back in, and that wisdom awareness notices, kind of surveys the destruction in the heart. Because in daily life, when we're in these unwholesome states, a lot of the time, we don't realize what gets laid down when the mind is involved in lust for 20 minutes or involved in hate for 20 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever it might be. But this contrast from having a relatively stable and pure and simple mind to what happens when the mind is in these storms of greed, hatred, and delusion, then we start to feel really motivated to take care of the heart. Because it's like, you get yourself through some keeping the wholesome qualities of mind. We really can cultivate such beautiful states of mind. And then we space out, the mind takes an off-ramp, that off-ramp leads to another off-ramp, which leads to and before we know it, in 2 or 3 moments, the mind can be in really negative, unwholesome territory. And then those storms tend to have their own feedback. So once we're in that storm, the tendency is to stay in the storm, to stay in the destructive cycle. And then it's like, even when wisdom and awareness returns, and the mind is no longer identified, no longer following the feedback loop and feeding the storm, but it might take hours for what has gotten wound up energetically in the body, the tension that's gotten activated energetically in the body. It may take hours for that to settle or to unwind. And that's karma. That is the fruit, the natural, inevitable fruit of the mind spinning in unwholesome states. And then the mind really learns, wisdom really learns, there's a price to pay. When, because we tend to think in more ordinary states of mind that I can, it's like visiting negative spaces. I can go down this road and be really angry or be really lustful and no harm done. I'm not acting on it. It's just in my own mind and heart. But when we're more sensitive, we see it really matters. And we want to really protect the mind. And we think twice about roads, off-ramps that we let the mind take. And it's not like we can control it because it's its own wild, natural process, the mind and its habits. But one of those habits can be this good friend that say, honey, do you really want to think that? Do you really want to go that way? Do you really want to regurgitate that? Is it helpful? Will it lead somewhere that is enlivening and releasing and healing? Or does it lead somewhere else, like hell? And just that honest kind of questioning is so useful. And he goes on in this section, Venerable Analio, to say, we really need to reward the mind. And the way we reward the mind, he gives the example of a puppy. You know, if a puppy did something, chewed on something it shouldn't have chewed on, you don't yell at it when it's, when it's already stopped chewing on it, right? You want to help the puppy see what's good, experience what's pleasant, that takes it away from the destructive patterns. This is just basic behavioral science, where it's just so much more effective to notice the mind and appreciate the mind when it's wholesome than it is, doing the parental finger wag at the mind. And even when we are intervening because the mind is an unwholesome territory, we do it with a lot of understanding, a lot of compassion, with a really wholesome sense of humor, in a gentle way, because it's the only way that works. He writes, if we want the puppy or the child to come when its name is called, we had better give it a reward. Why not reward ourselves for a state of mind that is undefiled? Rejoicing in its absence of defilement is a powerful tool that will make for swift progress on the path to a permanent freedom from defilements. So this summer course, the mind has been our object of awareness, right? And we're using this stability of present moment awareness to get to know the mind. You remember the refrain, and this refrain is used whenever, in this collection of teachings that we call the Satipatthana discourse, this teaching, the Buddhist teachings on mindfulness, the four foundations of mindfulness: body, feeling, tone, mind, and mind objects or dhammas. There's this refrain that's used 13 times. And it goes something like with the mind, it would say, in regard to the mind, one abides contemplating the mind internally or externally, or both internally and externally, right? Knowing the mind in the mind. And then the next part of that refrain, or one abides contemplating the nature of arising in the mind, or abides contemplating the nature of passing away in the mind, or both. And then the last piece in the refrain, or mindfulness that there is a mind, is established in one just for the sake of bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness, and one abides independently, not clinging to anything in the world. So you might remember the first week, I was quoting one of the Thai forest masters, where I think maybe told Ajahn Thanisaro, this Western monk who practiced in Thailand for a number of years, to know the mind right at the mind. And I remember another one of those Thai forest masters, before Ajahn Sumedho knew Thai, trying to convey some of the essence of the Buddhist teachings, just touched his heart and said in Thai, but in a way that Ajahn Sumedho got, it's all about this, right? It's all about knowing the mind, knowing the heart right at the heart. And, this we have to appreciate is not easy for us, because our attention is usually drawn into very gross things like, what do I need to do next? Oh, I got to call this person. I got to make my dinner. We're just on this very gross level of our lives and our responsibilities. And that's just how it is. But we can learn that even as we navigate all this gross, ordinary level of being a human being, we can be interested in the mind right at the mind, the heart right at the heart. And when we're here, then we can do that second part, which is it really is that part of understanding what's getting set in motion. When I'm at the heart, right at the heart, then I get a sense what kind of seeds are being planted. What sort of intentions? Is aversiveness active or kindness? Is greediness active in terms of the intentions, or letting go and generosity and contentment? So we see what's arising and passing. We see the wholesomeness or unwholesomeness of the quality of the intentions that are coming and going, that are acting on the heart, acting in a sense on the moment. What impressions are getting laid down? And then eventually, when that ability to comprehend what's skillful and unskillful is really strong, then we're really just practicing being independent, because the corrective mechanism is already built in. The mind already has the capacity to recognize what's skillful and unskillful. And we can really trust that. We don't have to be the one sort of getting rid of the unwholesome or aiming towards the wholesome, because the mind is now in the habit of knowing what's wholesome and unwholesome in terms of the intentions. And that naturally, like I mentioned right at the beginning tonight, it's the natural process that we're aligning with. And when we have that, when we've studied the mind enough, we've been a good student, it's just second nature. It's like if we have a really good dharma friend, they just sort of quiz us. How's your mind? And they expect us to know, oh yeah, there's some aversion there. And I'm watching it. I'm on top of it. I can't make that aversion go away, but I can be aware of the aversion. And the awareness of the aversion is not aversive. The awareness of the aversion is loving, it's wise, and it knows that if I'm not careful, the mind can get identified with the aversion, and then suffering can get set in motion. So it doesn't mean that there's not aversion when we're practicing well. It just means that wisdom awareness is aware when there's aversion, aware when there's greed. And I was thinking this could be a really good topic for the small groups tonight. Hopefully all of you can stay. And if not, then find a time to have this conversation with a good Dharma friend, but just your own testimonial about knowing the mind right at the mind. And the telltale evidence that you're knowing the mind right at the mind is you're able to comprehend without judgment, without reactivity, when that mind is under the influence of unwholesome intentions like aversion or greed, and how that aversion ceases on its own when it's seen for what it is. So the wisdom awareness doesn't go get rid of the aversion. It just sees that aversion is aversion, sees the unwholesomeness of it. That's the not feeding it. And the same thing, we want to see when there's non-aversion, when there's kindness, wisdom awareness sees the kindness. It doesn't have to ramp it up. Seeing that kindness is kindness, seeing that it's wholesome is what strengthens it, makes it shine, makes it radiant, makes it boundless. And this is why there's so much freedom that we discover in the practice, because part of what we're realizing is we don't even need to carry that load of being the practitioner. Initially, being the practitioner feels like a heavy load because we got to be vigilant. Otherwise, I'm going to get swept away by my unhelpful habits of mind. And I'll fall into my habit of being defensive or being irritable or grumpy or whatever each of our particular habit might be. But the more we study the mind in this way, we get to that third part of the refrain where it says, or mindfulness that there is this mind is established in one just for the sake of bare, simple knowledge and continuous mindfulness. And one abides independently, not clinging to anything in the world. Because the abandoning of what's unwholesome and the developing of what's wholesome, that is a natural process. It's not actually the work of the practitioner. It just initially seems that way. So I'll leave it here. And I'm going to make Dave the host. First, I'll end